This is Force for Hire,
a deep dive into private military contracting and how it's transforming the battlefield.
I'm Michelle Harvin.
And I'm Desmond Ferris. Welcome to another episode where we get a glimpse inside the lives of real people. For this episode, we'll be hearing from wives of military contractors. We were inspired after finding a 2008 op-ed by Mary Beth Laguna. She wrote about her anger at having to deal with scrutiny and mischaracterizations after her husband's death while working for Blackwater.
We wanted to see what others' experiences were like. And what was surprising is how few resources there are online for families of overseas contractors. However, I did find one, and that's how I met Barbie Baker. Her husband worked as a senior chief for 21 years, while Barbie was back at home doing her part.
So for James's last duty station, I was the command ombudsman, and that is the liaison between the command staff and the family members of the military personnel stationed here at Corpus Christi. And what that entailed was working with the local community outreach organizations and the military organizations such as Fleet and Family Support Center and the local military organizations on base, as well as the community organizations off base, in just reaching out and staying in touch with them if they have any issues about anything from base housing, who to contact, through their spouse needs something and they don't know who to talk to, directing them, who in the chain of command to go through, just stuff like that. And so I was very well connected and aware of organizations and groups that would provide sort of support for military families. My dad was a Vietnam vet. I have, being a military spouse, the opportunity to be involved and reach out and provide comfort and reassurance for the young military spouses. I was a young military spouse once also, and there's so many unknowns, the big picture of why things happen and where they go and are they safe, and money's tight this month, and just different things like that. People joke that I bleed red, white, and blue. So any opportunity to get involved and support our military and their families it's just a thing with me. So one of the things that I did was keep in constant contact with each of those IAs families and try to provide support for them, even though a lot of them went back home to stay with family while their sailor was deployed. I was very well connected when James retired. The chief's mess, the brotherhood of all of that was, everybody was saying, whatever you need, you just let us know, and, we're here for you. So it didn't seem like it was going to be like any different than any other deployment. And boy, was I wrong. Because once you're not affiliated with that daily interaction, everybody gets busy doing their job, taking care of the military families that have come in. I'm not by any means saying that it was, like nobody took my calls or anything. It just is a different dynamics of being involved with the groups. And so the other difference when they deploy as a civilian versus being deployed as military is there's not anybody that is providing updates for you. If you don't hear from anybody in a few days, a couple of weeks, there's somebody that is always that POC for the military deployments. And as a civilian contractor, there is none of that. So yeah, it definitely makes for a totally different dynamic of being in the civilian contractor situation. And just in talking to friends, somebody told him that they were looking into this company and that they were doing contract air traffic control, and they had contracts in both Bagram and Kabul. So he sent in his stuff, did his paperwork, and they said, we'd love to have you. And we said, well, we've done the long distance and the separations several times before, so we'll do that for a little while and see what the girls decide, and then of course everybody's like, oh, the money's great, and so we said, well, do that for a little while, save up to put some more with the girls' college funds, and sock some away, decide so we have it when we decide what we want to do, and off he went. And so whenever you would meet people or talk to people, and they would ask what does your husband do, or something of that nature, and you would tell them well, he's in Afghanistan right now, and they'd be like, oh my goodness, what is he doing? Yeah, well, he's a civilian contractor. And it, oh, that's what he's doing? Yeah. So the public perception of what that is just, I think people over there rolling around on cash, living the high life. And so there wasn't really any compassion or that reaching out to be supportive of being worried about them while they're gone, the stress of that worry, plus taking care of everything at home and raising teenagers by yourself, and girls at that. It was like, oh, well, at least the money's good. I mean, that's what I heard 90% of the time is, oh, well, the money's good. And so after a while you get to where, if your brain works like mine, it's like, okay, I'm not really seeing like this huge influx in, say, revenue, just for lack of better words. I'm not seeing a huge increase in funds, because when you're military and you do something, every expense is covered. When you travel, when you all these things, medical, insurance, every bit of it is covered. So when you start with like a military salary at the bottom of a ruler, and the civilian contractor salary at the top of the ruler, and then you add to the military salary the fact you've got insurance paid, medical paid, travel paid, and you keep moving up an inch at a time. And then for the civilian contractor salary, those things that are benefits to military are now expenses to civilians. And so you take that same list of things and you move that one down an inch at a time. Then when you get done, you're really running pretty close to even on what military personnel made. So it just got to the point where it was kind of insulting, where it's like, really, you deploy as military, which James did. So I'm not bashing military. Every support that is there for the military is amazing, and if it were up to me, there would be more. My whole point is that civilian contractors they're not less because they're deployed civilian contractors. Within that first month, I was just flat out depressed. Like I said, it's going from a constant support environment to, basically just like you are on your own. And of course, nights being the worst time, because the events are done, you're home from work if you do that, or, things are closed. There's only so many times you can go shopping at Walmart at midnight, to try to pass the time. And so that is when I went to Facebook and online and started searching and saying, if I was never big into those, but, they had like I remember when I was younger, much younger than when James went to Afghanistan, but they had like the chat rooms and stuff online and different deals that you could go communicate with people, and I went online, and I couldn't find anything, any type of network at all for deployed civilian contractor families, friends, anything of that nature. So when I went on Facebook and tried searching, I found all sorts of things for military spouses and for, stuff of that nature, but nothing for contractors. And I knew there was a bunch of them. I knew there was tons of them. I mean, just the ones I knew that were in the company that James was with. And so I went online and created a Facebook page, and I just called it Families and Friends of Deployed Civilian Contractors. And not really knowing how a lot of that stuff worked, I created the page, and then I just kind of shared it on my page and said, hey, if anybody's up at midnight and wants to chat with me, just let me know. I'll be, on this page. I'm just not the type to sit back and accept that there's not something. If it's something that, and I don't mean that sounds selfish, if it's something I need, I'm going to go create it. And knowing that there's no way that I was the only one. There's no way I was the only one that felt that way. I mean, I consider myself unique, but I don't consider myself that unique. I honestly think that people felt, and some of them probably, still do or whatever, felt guilty for feeling like there was something missing. Again, the social perception of military contractors is that they're living the high life, hotels, having fun, working, doing their little fun job. Air traffic control is one of those jobs that a lot of people, when people say, would ask James what he does, it's air traffic control. And he spent 8 years at sea during his 21 years. So when you say, air traffic controller, civilian contractor, you're like, oh, really? They're making, tons of money to stand in a tower and drink coffee and watch planes land and take off. And so I think that that is probably a lot of the reason why people didn't reach out, because they didn't want to be ridiculed or put down. You chose this. You chose to have this separation for all that money. Those things, I think, would be a big deterrent for somebody to reach out. I think the reason that I probably didn't have a problem doing it is because I've never had a problem defending the contractor spouses and what it's really like for some. And so a few friends liked it, and then they shared it, and it wasn't even a week, and there were several people that had joined it. And gosh, that first 3-4 months that the page was up, I had people from all over the United States that had been searching and found the page and liked it. And there were several hundred that had joined it, but there was a group of about 7 or 8 of us that talked multiple times a day, and I to this day still credit those ladies as how I made it through sanely. And some would probably argue with that, but I'm going to stick with it. We called each other DCC sisters, deployed civilian contractors. So that was probably my favorite part of all of it. Our family were firm believers in everything happens for a reason, and the things that happen and the things that you do, you find out sometimes the path wasn't just about you. And this has been probably one of the biggest validations of that, because again, like I said, there's so many of them that is their family. And unfortunately, I will say, the lifestyle is super hard. I think 5 of the 9 of our original group divorced within a year of their spouse deploying, and that's heartbreaking, but we're all still friends. To this day, I'm sure, people still join the page all the time. I mean, it's up to almost 1,500 followers of the page. And to me, that's kind of awesome. And the analytics of it show that it is people all over the United States, and there's even a few that are overseas. You know, it started getting more attention after a while, right before James left, because everybody that came in, he would tell them about it to tell their spouses. To this day, the majority of us still keep in touch. And there's only one of us that I know of, Nicole, whose husband is still doing the civilian contractor life.
Wife of a contractor for 9+ years. We kind of met in a roundabout way. We started chatting, and come to find out, I actually had done EKGs on him when he was 10 years old. When he was a little boy, he accidentally caught himself on fire, and he was severely burned. He had filled a paint can with gas. Fast forward, like 17 years later, we came in contact with each other, and we were like, okay, that's crazy. I remembered him as a little boy. As soon as he said that he'd been in the burn unit, I was like, oh my gosh, you're this one, and you were in this room. And so that was just kind of crazy. So we were like, well, we should meet. As soon as he walked in, I was like, oh no. So, because I just knew. And we ended up getting married a couple months later. That is actually part of why he's a contractor. So he was in the military for a short period of time. He'd gone through basic, and someone else died when they were running. And that person died because their sweat glands had been compromised due to burns. And so they came through and said, you know, if you hadn't been in for like a long time, and if you had more than 30% of your body burned, it didn't matter whether your sweat glands were compromised or not. And it wasn't, I mean, they knew everything going into it, you know, when he had done all the testing and everything, and they had it cleared because his sweat glands weren't compromised at all. And so it didn't really cause a problem for him sweating or not, but they just kind of came through and said, nope, if you have more than 30% burns or not, you have to take a medical discharge, which was good for me because then he came home, and then it was, you know, several years later after that we actually met. And then an opportunity came up for him, you know, to go work overseas. So that's kind of how the whole contractor thing even happened, because he had wanted to be in the military. He had wanted to do, you know, special forces and stuff, but then it just kind of, that life took a different turn, and it worked out for us. Just decided to look into it, and we thought it would take months. So it was within 5 or 6 weeks that he was gone. And that was 9+ years ago. That was 9 years ago in October. I come from military family. My father was in the Marines. I have an older brother. We were 4 years apart, and he was in the Army. And he actually died in bomb holder during a training exercise. Kind of knew what we were getting into, but the one thing that was really lacking for us was that for contractors' families, there's not really any support. So as a military family, you know, you have different groups, you know, on what branch you're in, and bases, or even in Guard, you know, they still have things for families to really help them out and to counsel and to make sure that everybody's kind of taken care of. I wasn't just kind of left out in the dark, but I think that's the one thing for a lot of people, and especially if they don't have any background with it, and I've seen that because through the group on Facebook, the Families of Contractors, you know, I saw kind of all across the board, people that had a really hard time with it, people that didn't. And it really, I think from the moment they leave, you really have to have the mindset that you just have to live day-to-day life. And I think one of the biggest things that happens is that people focus on the time apart and don't focus on living. I was playing in a women's volleyball league, and I met a lady whose husband had just recently died. And I was talking about how, I'm not going to see my husband, you know, for 9 months or whatever. Because now it's every 6 months. But when he first left, we didn't know what our schedule was going to be like. And then I was talking to her, and I'm like, I will never complain because I'm going to see my husband. I can talk to my husband every day. And I think that was put in my way from the very beginning so that I would change my mindset to that. because so much of it is a mindset. And so it just really made me focus on, living and not complaining or being upset because we were apart. So I had a daughter from a previous marriage, and she was in 8th grade. So whatever age that makes her, probably she's 22 now. But I think that being a single mom for 6.5 years had really prepared me for being apart from my husband. And we have a wonderful relationship. I think that that's when a lot of people have a hard time also, is when they don't have a good relationship. And we're also very fortunate that we're able to talk every day. So our normal mode of communication is like, he'll message me on Facebook when he's available, and then we Skype. It's a godsend. It's a total lifesaver. I mean, we talk for a couple hours a day. So because of Skype, which is really nice. And so we just had Sarah at the time, and she was in 8th grade. And then from the moment we got married, we struggled with infertility, which is also part of the reason he took the job, was because we wanted to be able to afford, any means that we needed to do, because we wanted children. And we suffered through infertility for 6 years. And we ended up doing some basic infertility stuff, and then we had to do full out infertility. So we did 3 full rounds of infertility. So our first round took for about a week, and then I miscarried. And then our second one, I just kind of knew that it wasn't going to. And so then we did a 3rd round right away. And that's the one that took, and we ended up having twins. And it's hard to say because we went through the pregnancy apart. But in some ways, because I was on kind of modified bed rest the whole time, because I had a lot of different things going on, some days it made it a lot easier because I didn't have to worry about how he also felt emotionally, or, cooking dinner for, a family every night, or things like that. I mean, it was awful too, because we didn't get to be together. He was home once, and then at the very, I think, beginning. And then he, as a contractor and with his company, he can usually schedule his time off. But it was when we were going through the drawdown before. So this was 4 years ago in October. And so there was a period of time where no one could take leave. So our little girl, she was baby B. She stopped growing at 35 weeks. I had a fibroid blocking her placenta, which we had kind of been watching the whole pregnancy. And then baby A had a tear in the placenta, so I would bleed all the time. And so it was a hard pregnancy, just extremely emotionally up and down. Sometimes my fluids would go down and they'd be worried, and then they'd go back up. We knew if anything happened, what the channels were that we needed to do. So at 35 weeks, she stopped growing. And so I had to contact the Red Cross, and then the Red Cross had to contact. So then they had to talk to our doctor's office, and then it had to go through a series of commands. So it had to go to one country and get approval, and then it had to go in country and get approval. And he made it out within 30 minutes. If they wouldn't have gotten the approval, he wouldn't have made it home for the birth. And so we already had everything set up. Like, my doctor's office knew, they knew that they were going to have to talk to the people in command, and we knew exactly who to call at the Red Cross. So we kind of had all the ducks in order. And he made it home on Wednesday afternoon about 3. And then I had a C-section on Thursday afternoon. So, but if he wouldn't have made it out on that particular flight, then he wouldn't have made it home in time. So, and then they were in NICU the whole time he was home. They were born on October 23rd, and then he had to go back on, I think, November 10th or something. I had twins at the time. My mom didn't live here. She just barely moved here, which is so wonderful. But I had no family, no help, 2 newborns. She did come and stay with me for 2 weeks, so that definitely helped. But I look back and it's kind of all a blur. So, but I think everything along the way kind of prepared me. So it was crazy. And now they're crazy. Now they run around and are nonstop. They just turned 4 in October, and it's getting harder. We're looking at hoping that he's home by the time they go to kindergarten. So they have October birthdays, so they won't go next year, but they'll go the following year. And so we're really hoping that if everything pans out, that he's actually home by then, because it gets harder and harder, and they miss him. And, now they can verbalize more, and Like our daughter will ask for him, like, oh, can't daddy come home? And so we have Nest cams in our home in their room so he can see them and talk to them like when they're going to bed. And then we have 2 other Nest cams in their play areas so that he can watch them and stuff like that. And then we have Skype, like we have an Alexa show in our kitchen that they can Skype with him on. You know, they definitely know what Skype is. So, because we use it so much. But it's nice, the Nest cam that's in their bedroom, like he can talk to them on it. So if they're doing something, he can be like, go to bed. So, which technology is great in that sense. But it never makes up for, you know, being in person and being able to hug and kiss and, you know, hold hands or, you know, go on little daddy-daughter dates or stuff like that. So last time he was home, it was actually 3 weeks. He took a little bit longer, but and when I talk about it, it sounds crazy, but it's what we've done for so long, and it's all that our kids know. And, you know, he absolutely loves what he does. And so a lot of people come home and they're like, oh, I really miss being over there. Because, you know, just like anyone in the military also, when you've been deployed for so long, you look at people that have served, you know, 6-7 tours, it's hard coming home. And he's worked in a war zone now for over 9 years. And so it will definitely be an adjustment when he comes home. He, you know, lives behind a gate and lives in a tiny, living conditions they're not deplorable for contractors, but they are kind of at the end of the line of the pecking order. It's kind of like if you or I lived in our closet all the time, it'd be really hard. And then you come home to, you know, or if you went and lived in a third world country for a period of time, and then you come home to, you know, all the normal, like, modern day luxuries. You love it, but it's very overstimulating also. There are many moments when I've sat in my closet and cried. It's hard, you know, just like, it's been really hard on my health, I think is part of it. I had meningitis, and I try to stay healthy, but the stress of it being, you know, but I do know what it's like to be a single mom also and have the stress of that. And I don't have the stress of being a single mom and having the financial stress, but not having, you know, you don't get married and have kids thinking, oh, they're not going to be here. And so even though we still parent together, that is one aspect that's really hard, is because I don't have where I can be like, okay, I really need a break. I'm just going to run to the store and, you know, go play with your kids. I don't get that. And so that's the hardest part, is being able to kind of stay in check. And when I do get super overwhelmed, not to take it out on my kids or not to take it out on him, which I do. I mean, we're a normal couple, and we can still fight 7,000 miles away. Like yesterday, I asked him for a password because I needed to set up. So my mom, I'm getting ready to go on vacation, my first vacation just for me, since I had kids 22 years ago. But my mom's going to take care of my kids, and so I wanted to set up one of our tablets in the kitchen so she can watch them on Nest Cam. And so I just said, I couldn't remember what our login was. And so I just asked for a login. And him being the sweet husband that he is, he was like, oh, well, I can set up a username and everything for her. And I'm like, no, that's not what I want. I just need the password. Like, I just want it up and running on the tablet all the time. She doesn't need to log in and out of it. So, you know, it's little things like that where and I was in the middle of doing a bunch of stuff, and I was like, please. So it's not, we still have the normal things, and my husband can wiggle his ears. And so sometimes when we're having a discussion over Skype on video, he likes to still, like, as if he was here, you know, trying to make light of whatever it was, he'll wiggle his ears at me. And it's really hard to argue with someone when they're wiggling their ears at you. I think it's a fine line of being positive and not positive and still being real. So one of the hardest times for me was when he was home after we did our first round of in vitro, and we were down in our theater room watching that, and I started cramping. And it was super hard for me to miscarry, but it was even harder because he was home. And it was great in a sense because he was home and he could be there for me. And yet it was so hard for me to see the pain in his eyes. And for him because it took us so long, and then we were so excited, and he just happened to be home for that transfer. And then like to have him be there when we found out that, I mean, I knew right then, and I could see like the little clot. And so that part was super hard, because I couldn't just like pretend that it wasn't hard. And I had to like really be raw. And sometimes that's hard when you get so used to not being raw all the time, because you try to be strong all the time. Those are the moments that are difficult. I don't try and like hide anything or anything like that, but it was just like one moment that I can really think of that was really hard for us. I mean, it was very connecting for us, but it was also really hard. And because he was leaving like a few days later. So, and then there are moments that you're glad they're home. We had a flight change once. Our kids they had tongue and lip ties, and they had to have them lasered. And it just so happened that his flight got delayed. And so then they were able to change it to the next day. And he was actually able to go to the pediatric dentist with me for the procedure. So he was able to be in the room with them. And I just had to stand out in the room listening to my kids cry as they had the procedure done. So it's a flip side. Sometimes it's really hard when they're home, and sometimes it's a huge blessing for moments like that. So, because I'm a very social person, I did research I started looking, and you do just a general Google search, and there really was nothing. And the person that started the Families of Contractors page, she had like just barely started it. Like probably it might have been like a month. It was in its infancy. And so I'm so thankful to her. Name is Barbie, and she lives in Corpus Christi. And her husband had been, I think he was retired from the military, and then he was a contractor, which is usually what happens. There's a lot of people that are, retired military and then go back. Those ladies from the very beginning of it, and it kind of died down, fizzled out after a couple years, but there's probably still about 10 or 12 of us from the original group when it first started that we still, talk on Facebook or, over chat or whatever, that we still kind of follow one another's lives. But it helped tremendously in the beginning to be able to have that. And sometimes our husbands' lives would, intersect, and they'd see each other. And so that it was a great resource. And everybody still sends messages or, tells their kids happy birthday. And it's been really interesting now to see everybody kind of, I think out of the original group, I think my husband is the only one that's still there. I think my husband is probably one of the longest contractors out there. But it's, just to kind of see everybody come home and go to modern day life. So even though I didn't have like a military type support, I did search out and still find that. And, we have great friends that always check on me, and like my in-laws we don't interact a ton, but if I need something, they'll come up. Like my father-in-law came up a couple days ago and fixed the winch on our 4-wheeler because we've had a lot of snow this winter. So just little things like that. But I always have had neighbors that have checked on me. I was very involved in my daughter at the time when she was in junior high and high school. So I always tried to stay busy and involved in things. And here in our community, there might be maybe one or two other people that I know of that their husbands are contractors. Just it's not, like when National Guard was deployed from here, which there was a unit that was deployed when my husband left. And so, you had 100 families that were affected. And so there was that base that they had. Whereas with us, it was all across the country. So you kind of just had to seek that out yourself and find that support. And so everybody's from different places. So for example, like Barbie was from Texas. Another person lived in Kentucky. Someone else was in New York. Just everybody's kind of all across the way. So I think the number one thing for me that is super hard is that, and people make comments on it of, we just do it for the money. I mean, the money's great, and I'm never going to discount that the money's good. And I had a really hard time in the beginning when people would say, oh, thank you for your service, because it makes me very concerned and disheartened when I think about how much our military people are, people that are enlisted, how little they get paid for what they do. And even though when they're deployed, they're getting hardship pay and whatnot. But there are a lot of people that suffer that have a hard time surviving on military pay. It was really hard for me when people would say, oh, thank you for your service, because I felt like, oh, I wish we could do more for our military. But on the flip side of that, that's probably over the years, one of the things that is super hard for me is when people tell me that we do it for the money, because there's no amount of money in the world, or at least for our family, for our beliefs, for our personalities, that would constitute us being apart and going through the struggles that we do for the money. The main reason that we do it is because my husband truly believes in his job and that it's helping support our military. Yeah, the money's great, but if he didn't love what he did and if he didn't feel like it made a difference, then he would come home and take another job in a heartbeat. That's the biggest stigma that I think is really hard. And I don't think that people understand. Well, for the most part, I think that a lot of people in our society just try to pretend that we're not still at war, but they don't really understand all the different jobs that it takes to function. You know, when they think about the military, they just think about, you know, like infantry or fighter pilots or different things like that. They don't really think about how it takes pretty much everything that you have in a normal community to run an operation and all the little things that go into that. And so I think a lot of times they don't think about the living conditions. They think that because one of the biggest stigmas is people think that because they're contractors and they make money, that they probably have the best living conditions. And that's definitely not the case. And there are moms, especially military moms or spouses that, you know, are sitting at home wondering every day if they're going to get that knock on the door that their loved one has been killed. And that's the reality of war.
What did you learn while listening to their stories when you were talking to them? Like Barbie, when you were listening to her, talking to her?
This was interesting because she was the one who built the Facebook community for other people, like Nicole, whose husband has been a contractor now for 9+ years.
But it's great that she was able to create something that was beneficial to others as well.
Yes, she was like the doer, and then everyone else benefited from that.
What about when you talked to Nicole?
Nicole, it was hearing like the struggles from a military wife. Like she talks about normal things like just being at home and dealing with kids without having someone there.
That's great, the insight Nicole is able to give that she probably shares with a lot more spouses than she realizes.
Yeah, no, it's true. Thanks to Barbie Baker and Nicole Woodland for sharing their experiences.
Don't forget to subscribe. And while you're there, leave us a review. And let us know your thoughts at podcast@stripes.com or find us on Twitter @StarsAndStripes.
Force for Hire's supervising editors are Bob Reed and Terry Leonard. Digital team lead and editor is Michael Darnell.
And we'll be back next time with our re-enlistment episode. Listen to hear about the transition from service member to contractor. And we'll talk about what it's like trying to join the workforce today. Thanks for listening.
This is Force for Hire.